The title of my paper, or working draft, is Homo Stultus, the Fool Within Us, the Archetype of the Fool and the Map of His Journey. And I'd like to dedicate this working draft to my father, who was a successful entrepreneur, and C. Lowell Harris, a distinguished professor of economics here at Columbia for many years. Allow me to thank Professor Phelps, who invited me to speak at this distinguished conference. In accepting the invitation, I realized that I am at the same age as Adam Smith was when he died. I took this as a good omen, but then again, I could be a fool. Speaking of fools, my last name, Pazzaglini, means the son of a fool in Italian, a jester, a trickster. If the fool persists in his foolishness, I am told he will become wise. So I arrived at my topic, Homo Stultus, the fool within us, through genetic inclination and the epigenetics of my foolish search for the philosophical foundations of economics and the good economy, individual values, human pursuits, self-realization, and becoming. The subtitle of this paper is The Archetype of the Fool and the Map of His Journey. Since I know that economists love charts and graphs, I decided to make one for you. A few caveats about the chart before you. One, it is my map, and my map is not the territory. No map is the territory. It is only a reflection of the territory. Two, you get to draw your own map. We are all stories to tell and become embedded in our own maps, almost possessed by them at times. However, it is important to look for overlapping consensus as well as instructive dissonance between and among all our maps. And three, this map is two-dimensional and fixed when it really should be multidimensional and ever-expanding in constant space-time motion. What it attempts to describe is dynamic, not static. Reality is indivisible change, uniting past and future in the present, which is the locus of power. The archetype of the fool. As in many of Shakespeare's plays, especially King Lear, the fool is a teacher, trickster, court jester, wise old man. He embodies forward motion, process, and emergent change, as in the Grail legend of Parsifal by Chrétien de Troyes. He is a self-expressive innovator and a master of language, not unlike the African trickster Legba. He expresses symbolic inversion, but can become a superior being through suffering and sacrifice. He can also become a savior, hero, and even lover. Like Socrates or Jesus, he confronts authority. The fool is duality, a walking paradox. It can bring good luck. Egyptian pharaohs and European kings used fools as power totems. I shall have more to say about the redemptive qualities of the fool later. History repeats itself. In addressing economics within politics, the fool first looks at the cycles or spirals of history. Written in 380 BC, Plato's Republic addresses the paradox of polities, especially democracy and oligarchy, and the struggle to balance virtue and moderation with the acquisition and creation of wealth. Quote, since those who rule in the city do so because they own a lot, I suppose they're unwilling to enact laws to prevent young people who've had no discipline from spending and wasting their wealth, so that by making loans to them, secured by the young people's property, and then calling those loans in, they themselves become even richer and more honored. That's their favorite thing to do. So isn't it clear by now that it is impossible for a city to honor wealth and at the same time for its citizens to acquire moderation? But one or the other is inevitably neglected. That's pretty clear, unquote. There is an eerie New York subprime mortgage word of caution here, remarked a friend, recognizing historical cycles of human greed and self-regard operating at odds with virtue and moderation. Like the Bacchae by Euripides, the fool knows human folly and does not assume that human wisdom and rationality can resist Dionysian madness, irrationality, cruelty, and excess. Remember that Euripides wrote this play at the end of his life and in the midst of the collapse of Athenian rational democratic government near the end of the Peloponnesian War, 404 BC. This great work is a supreme illustration of the battle between Sophia, wisdom, and Amathia, ungovernable ignorance. The fool knows both well and wonders what has changed about human nature over 2,000 years in addressing human pursuits, self-realization, becoming, and value. The fool will always point to our historical tale, T-A-L-E and T-A-I-L, and warns with Euripides that a deep ignorance of our own nature brings humiliation and destruction. Myth becomes reality. The fool's French name, Le Fou, is a cognate with the word fire, which reminds us of Prometheus, who stole fire from Zeus, 4 men, and was left alone, chained to a rock with an eagle or vulture pecking at his liver. Knowledge is a paradox. The fire that warms you can burn you. Pandora's insatiable curiosity releases destructive forces and all kinds of calamities from a box or jar until she closes the lid with only hope left therein. In Genesis 3, Adam and Eve pluck fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil and pay a hefty price for it. Being a paradox himself, the fool experiences the fruits and failures in the quest for knowledge and its relationship to self-knowledge. He is himself heaven and hell. Self-knowledge, self-realization, and becoming. We are all familiar with the advice of the Delphic oracle, to know thyself and nothing in excess. I shall try to remember this this afternoon. Socrates says in the Apology to the Men of Athens, if I say that it is the greatest good for a man to discuss virtue every day and those other things about which you hear me conversing and testing myself and others, for the unexamined life is not worth living for me. In Hamlet, Act 1, Scene 3, Polonius, who is a bombastic fool, says to Laertes, this above all, to thine own self be true. Please note that Shakespeare puts deadly serious words into the mouth of a fool. You will recall the beautiful essay by Emerson on self-reliance. We but half express ourselves and are ashamed of that divine idea which each of us represents. Nothing can bring you peace but yourself. Freud asks in Civilization and its Discontents, if the individual must give up something, restrict his desires to live in community, then what part of his self-knowledge gets buried and what levels of knowing get cut off? The fool gets dizzy with all these quotes, but recognizes that the self is dynamic, fluid, changing, and that he becomes himself in an unending process of selfing, like an acorn into a mighty oak, the entelechy of potentialities becoming actualities over time, as part of natural law. The fool also realizes that knowing yourself is not the same as being yourself or becoming yourself. The fool's other name is I am becoming. And the most important relationship he will have in his life is with himself. The self begins with a DNA fingerprint bounded by flesh, the largest organ of the body that moves through time and space with some kind of agency. It is both the subject of knowing and the object of knowing. The self has been endowed over time with many ways of knowing. Note the left side of the map, which may have a biological locus point or points for each way of knowing. Go neuroscience and evolutionary biology. The fool has some secrets to share with us about self-realization. 1, there is an outer journey and an inner journey in the quest for self-realization, a process of becoming who you already are. These two journeys can occur simultaneously and interactively, or serially and interactively and in any order. 2, the more you discover, understand, and experience the dynamics of this map, the more you will expand your awareness and range of choice, both metaphysical and physical, within the limits of fate or fortuna. You will experience more personal freedom, not as an end, but as a means to an end, which involves human pursuits, what should I do, broader ways of knowing, how do I know, new knowledge and ways of representation, new social contracts, and value. This map actually morphs with increasing knowledge and self-realization. 3, the evolution of your physical self is automatic. You become and pass away. The first phase involves the fear and challenge of life. The second phase involves the fear of death. Death enters into life to give it meaning, a good measure of any philosophical system. The death rate still remains at 100% for all of us. Becoming and passing away are part of the same curve for our lives and economics as well. 4, we need courage, perseverance, and hope to travel the map. What should I hope for? With an active will that rests over time on a broader and deeper foundation of self-knowledge. You will observe the various levels of self-knowledge on the right side of the map that lead to self-realization. Asking questions. Why must you know yourself before asking the Oracle of Delphi a question? The answer, whose question is it? The fool learns to ask well. To ask the right question is half the answer, indeed, virtually the answer. In the myth of the Grail, Parsifal, whose name means innocent fool, learns to ask his own questions, not to obey his mother. The poet Rilke advises us to embrace the questions like locked rooms and to live our lives into the answer. The fool can work from the question or the answer, or both, and fears that there are some questions that should never be asked or answered. The fool learns to confront his ignorance. He sometimes knows that he doesn't know, or doesn't know that he doesn't know, or at other times doesn't even know that he knows. Ironically, the more we expand the circle or map of our knowledge, the more we don't know. For a good dose of humility, we should read or reread Ecclesiastes. For all is vanity and the chasing after wind. For the making of books there is no end. The value of value, ethics, morals, and virtues. How shall we relate knowledge to self-knowledge within some kind of ethical, moral, or value-oriented framework? Respecting 3 levels. 1, the deep history of humanity, 4 million years of evolution. 2, the 10,000 plus years of agriculturalist social construction involving the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Code of Hammurabi, the Abrahamic religious laws, utilitarianism, secularism, and the like. And 3, the relatively more recent embrace of universal human rights and ecoethics. For example, how can our reason expand and develop the deep biological imprints of sympathy and altruism from family to tribe, local to global communities? The fool learns that knowledge without self-knowledge can be dangerous, and that new knowledge without ethics, values, virtues, or morals can be equally dangerous. Human pursuits, part 1. Knowledge is absolute and pretense. What are the intellectual claims and social practices of the 3 major divisions of contemporary knowledge? The natural sciences, social sciences, and the humanities. And how do they interact within institutions as disciplines, with modes of reproduction, coherence, and corners of truth? If economics, as queen of the social sciences, is to hold her throne, how might she go beyond mathematical modeling and quantitative technique and not fall victim to a pretense of knowledge, respecting the words of Friedrich Hayek with regard to prediction management and an expectation of quantifiable accuracy? The fool knows to be careful with prediction. by describing the development of the sciences as a process driven from behind. It is not necessarily a process of evolution toward anything. The process ahead is open and escapes prediction. Teilhard de Chardin aside, the fool accepts ambiguity. Without ambiguity, there will be no change ever. Here, the fool is at play again. We are studying ourselves. But which part of ourselves? We live in a complex and uncertain world. The truth has 1,000 faces, especially the face of the fool. The fool prefers true but imperfect knowledge, even if it leaves much indeterminate and unpredictable. The fool knows the danger of subjecting not only our natural, but also our human environment to the control of a human will. The fool moves forward, but understands that absolute knowledge becomes ignorance. The Hindus, when they build a temple, have one corner or leave one corner unfinished. Only the gods make something perfect. Man never can. It is much better to know that one is not perfect than one feels much better. Human pursuits. Homo stultus becomes Homo innovaticus. The fool is innovator. The fool within us becomes an innovator in paradoxical ways. On the one hand, we get the Singer sewing machine marketed to women for the first time on an installment plan with the option of a trade-in. All inventions of Isaac Merritt Singer, which were breakthroughs in technology and marketing. On the other hand, we get the air money of modern financial technology, exotic derivatives, and subprime mortgages in unsophisticated markets with no regulation, which led to our recent Great Recession. Or, as Professor Phelps points out, the biofuels fiasco, when people die of starvation because the demand for ethanol drove up the price of corn. Can we direct the fool within us as creator, magician, innovator to move not randomly, but in certain directions, such as climate change, foods, water, and health? Or must we live with ambiguity and paradox here? Science will always lead to application and does so with increasing speed. Natural science derives its driving momentum from machine-based technology, and the fool within us sits in the driver's seat. Our innovative and technological grasp frequently exceeds our ethical and moral grasp. We have a moral obligation to ourselves as well as to others. Justice is balance and value. Perhaps John Rawls did not expect that justice as fairness might have evolutionary roots and antagonisms. But in the recent New York Times article on this topic by Natalie Angier, as she observes that where there are huge degrees of inequality, Homo sapiens can throw better than other primates to dispatch an adversary. Institutional emotions seek retribution and overwhelm reason in the form of subaltern, retributive justice without a program. Witness the recent riots in London. The classic symbol of justice is a balanced scale. You can put the power of positive thinking and the thought experiments from the original position of Rawls in one pan, but the second pan may get filled with the penalties of our neglect, street crimes and riots, arson and mayhem. Nature abhors a vacuum. The fool remembers that we quite forget that we can be as deplorably overcome by a virtue as by a vice. There is a frenzied orgiastic virtuousness which is just as infamous as vice and leads to just as much injustice and violence. There is always the possibility in us of an unconscious takeover by whatever possesses us. To be possessed by an archetypal force is a bad thing when this possession leads to the exclusion of other important values. The fool travels light and carries all his possessions in a bag on a stick over his shoulder. He embodies Adam Smith's observation that every frugal man is a public benefactor and every prodigal a public enemy. Frugality was as important to Smith as division of labor and capital accumulation. With savings, we can influence the mediocrity of money by investing wisely and broadly in agriculture, commerce, and business, and for public works and the common good. With regard to value in the search for justice, let me share a noteworthy observation of Lorraine Daston and Peter Gallison in their wonderful book, Objectivity. It is perhaps conceivable that an epistemology without an ethos may exist, but we have yet to encounter one. The epistemic virtues mold the self and vice versa, and this self, in turn, enters into ways of knowing and to measure the object of knowing. This insight applies not only to natural science, but also to the social sciences, including economics. And finally, the redemptive qualities of the fool. 1, the fool reminds us of our mortality and warns us of the dangers of arrogance and pride, especially with self-deception and the absence of knowledge, or self-knowledge. After all, those whom the gods wish to destroy, they first make arrogant or proud, including heads of state, presidential candidates, IMF chiefs, and our congressional representatives as well. The fool will accompany you into your madness, as in King Lear, for he knows that real madness is to assume the absolute measure of a human being is rationality. 2, the fool equals all possibilities, embraces opposites, and even experiences divine conflict, if you will, which not only makes him more human, but also endows him with healing powers. 3, the fool helps us to break free and dodge the pressures of narrow, conventional, socially constructed and privileged ways of being, knowing, and representing what we know, see the middle of the map, and leads us back to broader and deeper ways of being, knowing, and representation. Take notice of the right and the left side of the map. 4, the fool in us gives us the courage and the will to undertake the journey to self-knowledge and self-realization. He represents not only the simplicity and hope of the journey, but also the bitter suffering and despair which separates us from the pantheon of Greek and Roman gods, forcing us to become fully human, for which mortality is a necessity. 5, the fool expresses a part of our humanity and psyche, the older reptilian brain, that remains behind and represents our original primordial nature, which can be ungovernable. Little is wasted by evolution. What lies below the surface affects the surface. Background becomes foreground. We must struggle to reconcile the older evolutionary parts of our brain and being with our more modern rational mind. The fool transits the divide between a head in the clouds and an ever-present abyss of reality and learns that he must keep his head and his feet by assimilating the instinctive drives and wisdom of the unconscious into his conscious, waking self. The fool spreads his toes wide and grips the earth, but does not let the grass go under his feet. The fool embodies the redemptive force that seeks the grail, but in seeking it shifts his center of gravity from the self or ego to a transcendent higher self, from self-knowledge to a connection with all life, paradoxically making him, near the end of his life, more and more a stranger to himself. It is our journey. He is our hero. And the fool accepts that one cannot pursue happiness. If he does, he obscures it. If he will proceed with the human task of life, happiness will be the outcome, or in any event, a modicum of happiness, contentment, and inner peace. And the fool confronts acrasia, the loss or weakness of a will without power or strength, with a hope that will not disappoint. Finally, for the study of economics, the fool counsels us to pay attention to human nature, the foundations of primitive thought, the primitive and the civilized within each of us, the interactions between nature and nurture, serious psychology and biology, especially neuroscience and genetics, and models of behavior that move from the individual to society. I began with Adam Smith, and I shall end with Adam Smith. In A Theory of Moral Sentiments, which he regarded as his most important work, he says, "Wealth and external honors are their proper recompense, and the recompense which they can seldom fail of acquiring. What reward is most proper for promoting the practice of truth, justice, and humanity? The confidence, the esteem, and the love of those we live with. Humanity does not desire to be great, but to be beloved." In the end, Adam Smith becomes the fool who represents love. For amor vincit omnia, love conquers all things, even imperfect love. In the end, for us, what really matters more is not the goods we have produced and consumed, but what we gave to and received from love. Thank you.